Mr. President, 1 year ago today, the Senate Judiciary Committee opened its hearing on the nomination of Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch. The Stanford Law and Policy Review has now published my article on one of the opposition's arguments made in that hearing, and sure to be repeated should President Trump have the opportunity to make another Supreme Court nomination. Today, I want to look at the lower courts because no less than 138 positions on the federal district and appeals courts are vacant. That does not include 33 vacancies that we already know will occur in the next year or so. Everyone must understand both the seriousness and the cause of this crisis. By itself, 138 is just a number. It's a big number, though, but it needs a frame of reference or a standard for us to know whether this number of judicial vacancies is normal or a serious problem that has to be addressed. I certainly don't want to be accused of partisanship, so I will rely solely on the standards and criteria used in the past by my Democratic colleagues. Let's first use some Democratic standards to evaluate the number of judicial vacancies that we face today. One standard is that Democrats have specifically identified how many vacancies are unacceptable. In February 2000, with a Democrat in the White House, Democrats said that 79 vacancies was, quote, too high, unquote. In September 2012, with Democrats both in the White House and controlling the Senate, they declared a, quote, judicial vacancy crisis, unquote, when there were 78 vacancies. Now, if 78 vacancies is a crisis, what is the label for 138 vacancies? This is the highest judicial vacancy total since September 1991, but more than half of those vacancies were fresh from Congress creating new judgeships several months earlier. So I think it's fair to say that in either total or percentage terms, we face today the most serious judicial vacancy crisis that anyone in this body has ever seen. A second Democratic vacancy standard is that, as they did in April 2014, we can compare judicial vacancies today with vacancies at the same point under previous presidents. If that Democratic standard is valid, vacancies today are 35% higher than at this point under President Obama and 46% higher than at this point under President George W. Bush. There is a third Democratic vacancy standard. In June 2013, and at least as far back as April 1999, Democrats have complained that the Senate was not confirming enough judicial nominees to keep up with normal attrition. Well, judicial vacancies today are 30% higher than when President Trump took office, and as I said, at least 33 more. 33 more have already been announced. Finally, Democrats have frequently said that the 107th Congress, the first 2 years of the George W. Bush administration, should be our judicial confirmation benchmark. During that time, the Senate confirmed an average of just over 4 judicial nominees per month. The Senate has so far confirmed 28 of President Trump's district and appeals court nominees, or fewer than 2 per month. Take your pick. By any or all of these Democratic standards, we face a much more serious judicial vacancy crisis than in years past. In addition to the gravity of this crisis, however, the American people need to know its cause. I can tell you what is not causing this vacancy crisis. President Trump started making nominations to the federal district and appeals courts on March 21st, 2017, just 61 days after taking office, as you can see on this chart. By August last year, he had made more than 3 times as many judicial nominations as the average for his 5 predecessors of both parties. President Trump has nominated 86 men and women to the federal bench since he took office 14 months ago. If the president is making so many nominations, perhaps the problem lies somewhere in the Senate confirmation process. Once again, my Democratic colleagues can help figure this out. In November 2013, then Judiciary Committee Chairman Patrick Leahy spoke about obstructing judicial nominees, quote, in other ways that the public is less aware, unquote. Democrats are using such below-the-public radar obstruction tactics at each stage of the confirmation process. The first stop in the confirmation process is the Senate Judiciary Committee. Under Chairman Chuck Grassley's leadership, the committee has held a hearing for 65 of President Trump's judicial nominees, more than under any of the previous 5 presidents at this point. So that is clearly not the problem. The first sign of Democratic obstruction is the unwarranted and partisan opposition to reporting judicial nominations from the Judiciary Committee. In February 2012, 3 years into the Obama administration, Democrats complained that 5 nominees to the U.S. District Court had been reported by the Judiciary Committee on a party line vote. This, they said, departed dramatically from Senate tradition. Today, just 14 months into the Trump administration, 8 nominees to the U.S. District Court have been reported by the Judiciary Committee on a party line vote. The present rate of such party line votes in the Judiciary Committee is more than 4 times what Democrats criticized just a few years ago. The below-the-radar obstruction tactics continue when the Judiciary Committee sends judicial nominees to the full Senate. Democrats, for example, refuse to cooperate in scheduling confirmation votes. They can't prevent confirmation votes altogether because they abolished nomination filibusters in 2013. But if they can't make judicial confirmations impossible, they are determined to make them difficult, very difficult. Here's how they do it. The Senate must end debate on a nomination before it can vote on confirmation. The majority and minority have traditionally cooperated to end debate and set up confirmation votes. In March 2014, not for the first time, Democrats said that refusing consent to schedule votes on pending nominees was obstruction. When the minority refuses that consent, the only way to end debate and set up a confirmation vote is the formal cloture process, which requires a cloture vote and can add up to several days to the confirmation timeline. As seen here, since President Trump took office, Democrats have forced the Senate to take 28 cloture votes on judicial nominations compared to just 2 cloture votes at this point under the previous 5 presidents combined. Even when cloture is invoked, Senate rules provide for up to 30 hours of debate before a confirmation vote can occur. Nearly half the time under President Obama, a judicial nomination cloture vote was followed by a confirmation vote on the same day. Under President Trump, that has plummeted to 17%. The average time between cloture and confirmation votes for President Trump's judicial nominations is more than 55% longer than it was under President Obama. When a judicial nomination gets out of the Judiciary Committee, survives an unnecessary cloture vote, and then is subject to post-cloture delay, Democratic obstruction is still not over. In March 2012, Democrats complained about senators voting against nominees to the U.S. District Court who were supported by their own 2 senators. In fact, Democrats called this a new standard of obstruction because it departed so far from Senate tradition. Okay, let's assume for the moment that this Democratic standard is also valid. At this point, in the previous 5 presidencies, from President Reagan to President Obama, U.S. District Court nominees had received a combined total of 10 negative votes. So far, under President Trump, his confirmed District Court nominees have received 72 negative votes. 2 weeks ago, The Pew Research Center released a new analysis showing that President Trump's confirmed judges have, quote, faced a record amount of opposition, unquote. In fact, this analysis concluded that President Trump's judges have each received an average of more than 22 negative votes, quote, by far the highest average for any president's judges since the Senate expanded to its current 100 members in 1959, unquote. This level of opposition is more than 4 times what it was under President Obama, or should I say, not just opposition, oppositional delay. These tactics don't involve high-profile filibusters or headline-grabbing confirmation defeats, but internal Senate rules and unwritten traditions. That's why they operate below the radar. Yet Democrats criticize these tactics precisely because they take their toll. Individually and especially in combination, they can add days and weeks to the time it takes to confirm a single judicial nomination, even when the final confirmation vote is unanimous. In November 2013, for example, Democrats said that taking cloture votes on unopposed nominees amounted to, quote, obstruction and abuse of Senate rules, unquote. At that point, almost 4 years into the Obama administration, the Senate had taken one cloture vote on a judicial nominee who was later confirmed without opposition. Just one. We are only 14 months into the Trump administration, and Democrats have already forced the Senate to take 5 cloture votes on nominees who were later unanimously confirmed. It has already happened twice this month. If doing this twice amounted to obstruction and abuse, what would my Democratic colleagues call it 5 times as often in 1/4 the time? These are just a few of what then Chairman Leahy called obstruction tactics that the public may not be aware of. Believe me, there's more where these came from. Like I said, I want to avoid partisanship. Each of these is a democratic standard. These are democratic criteria. If my colleagues who once thought these were valid standards want to abandon them now, then perhaps they were also wrong the first time around. Otherwise, we have to face the conclusions that follow from applying these democratic standards and criteria. We face an unprecedented judicial vacancy crisis. Since President Trump is making nominations and the Judiciary Committee under Chairman Grassley's leadership is steadily processing them, there remains only one explanation for the vacancy crisis we face today. Plain, old-fashioned, partisan obstruction. Democrats are manipulating this process at every stage, using the very tactics that they have loudly condemned in the past to make confirmations as difficult and time-consuming as possible. Even in politics, actions speak louder than words. In July 2012, when there were 76 judicial vacancies, Chairman Leahy said that, quote, we should be doing better, unquote. Today, with nearly twice as many vacancies, I challenge my Democratic colleagues to put actions to those words. Mr. President, I suggest the absence of a quorum.